Hello fellow mortals, I am Quimgy, your host, and today I will be talking about something that I wanted to submit to RPG Horror Stories. However, it was going to be a bit too long, so here I am going to be talking about the worst DM I have ever had. I went in a year-long campaign with her, and it was full of extremely powerful DMPCs, outshining the characters, killing off players she didn't like, letting the ones she did like live, allowing any and all homebrew, and having her own broken homebrew. She refused to compromise when any problems were brought up, and the list just goes on and on. I will be starting off with our first session that we ever had, and the immediate red flags that were brought up. I originally found out about this campaign through a flyer at my college. I ended up arriving there and meeting 14 other people who would be playing in our game, and the DM, who we will be calling Stacy for confidential reasons. So this was Stacy's first time actually DMing, and she had a grand total of 14 people to try and cater to, which was immediately off to a very bad start. She began to come around and tell people about her homebrew setting that took place in these different realms. There was a bunch of different realms, like the fire realm, the water realm, the nature realm, all those elemental things like that, and she basically told us that we had to pick one that we would start off from. The realm that you came from also gave different bonuses, like if you were from the fire realm, you would do fire damage and you would have resistance to fire damage, and so on with all the other realms, which was kind of overpowered, but I didn't think it was that bad at first. I ended up making a level 1 bard named Jaquil that came from the light realm. We all started off in a tavern, which, with our 14 people, we basically took up the entirety of the tavern. As we're waiting for something to happen, a gnome begins to get on stage and pulls out a microphone. We were very confused because we didn't know that modern technology was in this campaign, but apparently it was now. He pulls out a microphone and he starts screaming some heavy metal music, you know, those gosh darn gnomes and their heavy metal music. A hag bursts down the door and begins to shoot a beam of green energy at him, and he turns into a frog, screaming that she did not like the music and they needed to turn it down, and initiative has begun as all of the 14 level 1 players begin to start taking on this hag. Hags aren't exactly good enemies for level 1 players, however there was 14 of us, so we did stand a decent chance, but about every round was 90% of the people missing, maybe one person hitting and doing about 6 damage, and then the hag's turn going, and she would hit someone and one-shot them down onto the ground unconscious. But, you know, we had a ton of people who would just get them back up, so each person would just fall back down and get back up each round. She also started shooting these frog beams at us as well, and the DM let us know that the frog beam did not have a save. There was no chance at avoiding becoming a frog, unless you were specifically from the nature realm. If you were from any other realm besides the nature realm, you would just become a frog for the rest of the combat, and that's all you could do. This combat ended up taking about 3 hours of real life time, and it's just about as boring as you'd imagine it. It took 45 minutes to get back to my turn, where I would bardic inspiration someone, and then it would take another 45 minutes to get back to my turn, and it was still alive, and they were not looking any worse for wear. Something that was pretty funny that did happen during this was one of the people who was around the table ended up getting a phone call from their mom, and decided it would be better to just talk at the table rather than go out in the hallway and talk about it, and the awkwardness that ensued from that was just great. She was in an argument with her mother saying, "No, I'm at the school. Oh my god, no, you dumb bitch, I'm at the school. Like there's a teacher right here, do you want to talk to him?" And one of the other players actually was a teacher from the college, and he was just sweating bullets like, "Please, no, I don't want to have to deal with this right now." And we were just awkwardly trying to roleplay in the background while this whole scene unfolded in front of us. Eventually, this elven woman in the bar began to transform into a giant gorilla. She then went and ripped a giant greatsword off the wall and began to start attacking the hag. We would get to know this NPC as Beatrice, who later she ended up joining our party and told us that she was actually a pacifist, which I think the DM just forgot that this big fight happened with her turning into a gorilla and taking a giant greatsword and attacking someone with it. But I think her reasoning for calling her a pacifist was she was an 11th level spellcaster and we were only level 1, so she didn't want her to interfere with the fighting. Eventually, the 3 hours drifted into 4 hours and we finally ended up defeating the hag. And the DM let us know that the hag actually had a lot of HP left because the DM decided the best way to balance it was to double the HP of the hag versus all of our players, but then got bored of all the combat and decided to just let her die in the end. So after our brave, valiant heroes finally win the battle by the DM becoming too bored to let it continue, Beatrice tells us that we did a good job and to come to the city for a special mission. The gnome in our group tries to steal something from the bar while everyone is talking. The bartender notices and pulls out a goddamn bazooka and says, "Put it back." We ask the man, why didn't he use the bazooka on the hag? And he said, it's only for self-defense. Everyone looked around very confused as it was his bar that was being attacked by the hag. Anyway, after general moments of confusion, we all end up going to bed at the tavern and waking up in the morning heading over to the city. And on the way to the city, we end up getting a random encounter. Our 14 players run into one shade. Normally, 14 players versus one creature would not be a hard fight at all. However, we were all level 1. Our DM kept telling us that physical weapons were not going to do any damage to it. And most of our party was people who only did physical damage. We only had about 2 people who had any spells. Basically, about 45 minutes goes by and everyone who does physical damage is just kind of sitting around while the people who have the magical spells are sitting in the back just trying to kill this thing because we have no actual spells that do that much damage at the moment. We also found out during this encounter that our gnome barbarian really liked to bully the other players. For example, when one of our melee players wanted to hit the shade even though he knew it did no damage, our gnome barbarian was like, "You know it does no damage, right? Okay, I'm just gonna roll to choke him," and then would roll without asking the DM if that's okay. And he's like, yeah, I got a 19, do I choke him? This was also the gnome who tried to steal something from the tavern, and I'm just mentioning it now because it will surely show up in future videos. About halfway through this, I happened to know what the monster was because I had thrown a couple of these at my players recently, and I knew that physical damage only did half damage to it, but she was telling us that physical damage did no damage to it. So I asked her if it was homebrew, and she said no, and I explained to her that it should be only doing half damage. Something this early having invulnerability to physical damage was very broken, because that's basically all the players have. But she decided to ignore me and wait till the end of the fight where she just had it run away because we weren't doing any damage to it. And then she looked into her book and realized that it should have been doing half damage instead of taking none. And that was the end of our first session. If you guys like this, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel because I will be making more of these. Like I said, I was in a year-long campaign with this Dungeon Master. For those wondering why I'd stick around for a year if I didn't like the playstyle, I generally enjoyed the world and the people I was playing with, and it wasn't really until later that I figured out there was so many problems. But looking back, I could obviously tell there was a lot of red flags that I missed. Thank you for making it this far in the video. I love you all, and I hope you have a good night.